Hey everybody. So I'm gonna start answering the questions that are coming through, and the first one is actually two questions from Lisa. She asks, "What are fae, and do fairies like it when we build fairy houses and fairy gardens?" We have a few houses, and I wonder if anyone lives in them. Fae, it's complicated. The world is very vast and complex. There's no one answer for the reality that we live on. The way it was described to me by Kanlai's a Sasquatch out in the Appalachians, is that there are many different worlds on the earth, and we are in one of them, and it's like layers of an onion. And the Fae world lives on a layer of the onion that's very close to ours. They can interact with us physically. They can use physical objects. They can manipulate energy. A lot of them can look like energy to us, but they have their own physical universe, essentially, that they live in on top of the layer that we are on. And their layer is very highly connected to nature. So trees are kind of bridges of consciousness between layers of the worlds. And so a lot of them live in trees, a lot of them live in nature. They're very, for the most part, very natural creatures, especially smaller ones. When you get to the larger things that I consider fae, like the fawn from Pan's Labyrinth, sometimes I see them in the woods, but I almost exclusively see them in hotels and motels, public places where there are a lot of people, because they feed on the energies of those people and that sort of thing. The gnomes, pixies, goblins, elves, trolls, they all exist. The fairy lore of Celtic lore, Gaelic lore, different cultures have different names. Indigenous call them nature spirits. They're all real. And gnomes, they don't always look like the typical. If you think, I'm 37, so if any of you, the younger generations may not understand this, but David the Gnome from the 80s cartoon is actually based on a real gnome that came to a guy and asked him to write a book back in the 60s or 70s, I don't remember. And then they made a cartoon out of it that was actually based on a real gnome that called himself David. I think he called himself David. They might have changed it, but the book, Will Nguyen, I'll see if I can find the book. I have it somewhere in my house. But they are very, very real here, physical. If that helps answer that question, they're not mystical creatures, and they're very, the thing I'm being told to say is, they do what they want and they don't care. I have a lot of stories in my book, The Raven's Way, about Fae, and the book, The Fae Experiences. The Fae Experience is kind of a spattering of different Fae that I've met, and the Raven's Way I met a ton out in New Mexico when I was on a trip, and encountered some issues where I was treated poorly, not by them, but by humans, and they took action against the humans. So they're very protective to those that they love and like. They are beautiful, beautiful spirits. If you treat them well and give them offerings of like oats, honey, seeds, grains, fresh fruits. Doug's from New Mexico, they absolutely love fresh fruit. That helps build a relationship too, if you give offerings and acknowledge that they're there and around you. They are all very different personalities. You will probably never meet one exactly the same as another. Just because they might look like gnomes or pixies doesn't mean that is what they are. There are very many different cultures of fae. I have met, the Seelie, which is a sect of organized fae from Celtic lore, kind of like a kingdom. I've met a couple different kingdoms that call themselves different things. I've met you might call them cities of gnomes and different things, and they all operate on their own, act on their own, have their own personalities, but they're willing to work with humans if you acknowledge them, love them, accept them, and that sort of thing. They, for the most part, are not malicious. Most of them are. Doug's telling me, please tell them we're not malicious. We just like to play. They love to play. Doug brought a friend, or actually he didn't bring a friend. He brought I had a fae being, he's about 3 foot tall. Kind of reminds me of an alpaca, humanoid alpaca, show up one day. Doug and I went shopping. Jake came with us, Jake the alpaca. And I came home and tried to open my trunk, and my trunk would not open. And I have an automated trunk on my Subaru that you just hit the button and it opens up, lifts up, and it's an SUV, not like a car trunk. So I'm looking at it and I'm going, what's going on? This doesn't make sense. Why isn't the car opening? And I'm sitting there, I'm clicking the button over and over and again, and you hear the beep 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 beep. You hear the gears moving. The trunk moves up, slams back down. Trunk moves up, slams back down. Trunk moves up, slams back down. What the hell is going on? Click the button on the back. Trunk moves up, slams back down. And then I'm looking, and I'm like, because I'm kind of out of it. I'm not connected. I'm turned off to my senses. So I'm like, okay, something's here. Gotta be. And I look, and Jake and Doug are in the back of the car, and every time the trunk lifts, they jump on it and use their weight to pull it down. So I wasn't allowed to open the trunk. They play tricks, they play games, but it's usually not malicious unless if you get angry at them, if you start acting out, it will affect them too, and they'll get emotional. And one of the best things to do is, if you do think you have angered one of them, is just to give offerings and thanks and tell them you're grateful for their presence. Even goblins get a bad rap because of media, but they are they're not the most peaceful of energies. They are very chaotic. I have had, when I had goblins around, I had to create separate offering spaces because they would push the other fae out of the way and take it from them, basically. But they were never malicious. They were just greedy and self-absorbed, I guess, is probably the best way. Their intentions were not harmful. So hopefully that answers the question about kind of who they are and what they are. Just a different layer of the world, but one we're very close to and one we can connect with. And they do have it's hard to explain unless you experience it, but they do have like a physical realm. Alice in Wonderland, down the rabbit hole, going to different places. There are some other movies out there, but Alice in Wonderland just keeps popping in my head, so I'm gonna say that, where she goes, down the rabbit hole and ends up in another world. Those types of things. If you want good, here I can tell you this. If you want really good stories about fae, one of them is Spiderwick Chronicles is really good. Pan's Labyrinth is extremely good. And seeing if anything else pops in my head. I keep hearing the cartoon. Tell them about the cartoon Epic. Epic is a cartoon. Okay, they're just saying that's all for now. But there are some movies that get it close to accurate based on people's experiences. So those three are worth checking out. And I would say Pan's Labyrinth and Spiderwick are probably the top two for understanding some of the Fae. And in Pan's Labyrinth, if you've seen it, there's a doorway and they kind of go into another world. But they're also here too. And that's kind of what happens when fawns are around. If I'm in a motel room, like a portal opens, they walk out, they walk, they'll walk into the room, come. If you saw my video about the Pan creating me some light tech, he came through a portal in the bathroom, sat there with me. Then when I was ready to go to bed, he turned around and walked through the portal and disappeared. So the stronger they are, the more they can travel and do things like that. And they're just very, very magical beings. And there's not really one answer as to what they are or who they are. You have to experience them, and that starts with making offerings, communicating with them, just telling them that you're there, you're peaceful, you're loving, and you want to communicate. As far as houses go, they love that's a form of offering. They love that type of thing. Bird houses, fairy houses. It's a way of showing them respect and inviting them in. They love plants. Doug's like, we love plants more than the houses because they can live in the plants. He just sits in his garden. I have a garden for him in my house that I built, and he just sits there in the sunlight of the window and enjoys it. They don't necessarily need the home, but they do like that. And the more natural you can make it, the better off it'll be. Resin houses there's a lot of resin stuff on the market because one of the things with this type of thing is it's very commercialized, and people are buying these things to do fairy gardens. They're buying stones and not stones like resin stones, fake stuff, low energy stuff. You can use them and they will work, but if you really want to invite them in, it's a lot better to use natural stuff or to build your own, like sticks and stones and mosses and grasses, and kind of build something for yourself. Does not mean they don't appreciate resin stuff or plastics and all these other things, but they are much more attracted to natural things, which is why they live in trees. I once had a fae that came out of a tree stump, and he came out. I saw him there. I was walking down the path. I was with somebody on a hike, and they said, "Hey, I heard that they want to give that to you." And I was out of my space because my dead grandparents were around me fighting about some stuff, and they were fighting with each other, not me, which was kind of funny to experience. But the person I was with pointed to it, and then I focused, and I was like, "Oh yeah, there's a gnome that wants me to have this stone." And I looked at the tree stump that had been cut down, sitting on a ledge of rock, and I could actually see the door at the bottom. It had been carved out of bark and was kind of folded back. And he was peeking out of it. So like, they live in tree stumps. If you got tree stumps, actually there's a house near me that has a tree stump that they actually made a door. Somebody did some carpentry and made a door and a window on the tree stump, which is very cool. But the more natural, use oats and honey for offerings, seeds, nuts, berries, and be patient and vigilant. Sometimes you'll see them move around. They'll leave gifts. If you give offerings, they'll leave gifts for you. It takes time. They can be, if you're on the East Coast, they're very hard to trust. It can take a lot of work to get them to trust you. In New Mexico, they opened right up to me. It was a very different experience. So sometimes they'll trust quickly, sometimes they won't. But hopefully that answers the question. If you have any other questions, just DM me, comment on any of my videos. I'm going to keep making them, and we'll go from there. So thank you for asking that. I think that was Lisa. I'll tag you in this post.